Steve, really excited to have you, man. And I know that you've had a really varied career. You've had a lot of great experiences, not only as a player, but also as a staff member to a lot of great teams. And I really want to start at the beginning of your career and talk about your experience as a walk-on player at the University of Texas.
Yeah.
How did that happen, and what was that experience like?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so grateful for the college experience that I had. I grew up in a small, rural East Texas town where not many people go to college, let alone go to college at a major institution like the University of Texas. And so for me, I grew up in a home where I just had big aspirations and big hopes for my future life. And I thought that needed to start at the University of Texas. I don't know what it was, but I just dreamt that the University of Texas must be the greatest school in the world if it's the flagship institution in the greatest state in the greatest country. And so I knew nothing about school down there. I really knew nothing about Austin culture, but I knew that that's where I wanted to go to school. And had the privilege to go down there as a walk-on, walked onto the football team back in the fall of 2000, which was a long time ago, 20 years ago this fall. And quite frankly, I had an unbelievable college experience. From day one, I can still remember it vividly, what life was like as a student athlete at UT. And in so many ways, I would describe my experience down there as dreamlike. If I were to write the script for my college experience, I couldn't have written it any better. And just leaving, like I said, a very small community in Northeast Texas, going down to Austin, which I might as well have gone to Mars, culturally speaking. It was infinitely different than what I grew up with. And so I went to school down there, and from the first moment I stepped on campus, I knew I was right where I needed to be. And it was very difficult and very demanding and challenging, and I was far outmatched by my teammates who were superior to me in every physical and ability measurement. They were just overwhelming compared to me, but I knew I was where I was supposed to be, and ended up having a terrific career athletically, a wonderful experience as a student at Texas. Grew up in 100 different ways, and it was really just a dream come true. It was special.
That's awesome. Really great to hear. And you talked about some of the other great athletes you were around. What was that like for you, I guess, like mentally and physically, kind of coming into this new world and being around, quite honestly, University of Texas, early 2000s, there's a lot of world-class athletes, some very good football players that are on that team. What was that like for you, just that challenge of kind of having to step your game up and being around such great talent?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, when you grow up in a small country town, a small community, you play every sport, right? I mean, in 3A East Texas football, I played football, basketball, baseball, track, and golf my senior year of high school. And I had peers that were alongside me that were much more athletic and much more gifted than I was in high school. But then I went to the University of Texas, and I was a fan of Texas football before I became a student athlete there. And so I remember arriving on campus, and one of my very first workouts, I was enamored the first time I saw Major Applewhite. And this is going way back in the day for Texas football history, but when I saw Major Applewhite in person for the first time, I thought, this is a big deal. This is pretty special. And not long after that, I remember seeing Chris Sims in person, which of course, that was a time when those two guys were battling it out for the starting job at the University of Texas. And it stood out to me very significant. I can still remember when I saw those guys, and I just thought, this is different. This is something special. These guys are national celebrities playing college football, and I'm just this country boy from East Texas trying to make my way. And being around those world-class athletes, like you said, and I don't know that anybody would argue that Major or Chris were world-class athletes, but I had some teammates that were. Absolutely drew me up and called me up in terms of my commitment to the game, to my commitment to my training and study of film and preparation. All those things were absolutely driven forward, being surrounded by athletes that were, as I said, significantly more gifted than I was if I had any aspirations to compete or to bring value to the organization, I was going to have to work my tail off. Maybe even more so than those other guys who were naturally much more gifted than I was.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people don't quite understand is, when you are in a walk-on type situation, or maybe even a situation that you might be slightly out of your league in, you do have to put in that extra work. You do have to kind of compensate for your lack of talent, which is totally great, right? Like it allows you, like you said, to have that extra commitment, that extra drive to be a part of that team. So talk to us about kind of like your evolution from 2000 Steve Stigall to 2004 Steve Stigall. So talk about kind of your path through Texas football and your contributions to the team.
Awesome, thank you. One of my inspirations was my big brother, my older brother. His name is Jeremy Burleson. He's the head football coach right now at Kaufman High School here in Texas. And my brother was a college football player as well. His dream was to play football at Texas. And so, because he was my big brother, who I admired and looked up to significantly, I wanted to be like him. I wanted to do what JB did. And he played college football at A&M Commerce. But while I was at Texas, my fuel so often was I wanted to make my brother proud. I wanted to do what JB would be doing if he were at Texas. And so I recognized my limitations. Although I'm tall and have a decent physical build, I was not nearly as gifted and as athletic as some of my teammates. So I knew that I had to overdo it in terms of my work ethic. And so my goal every day, specifically in the weight room and in conditioning and off season, was to outwork everybody. I just wanted to be a grinder. Nobody was gonna ever beat me in a conditioning drill. Nobody was ever gonna beat me in a sprint. Nobody was gonna beat me in the weight room. I was just gonna bust it for 5 years. And that included practice. When we're shoulder pads and helmets are strapped on, man, I was going to be a terror out there for my teammates. And although I was, I hearken back to watching Rudy in the late 90s, but I was trying to imitate what Oklahoma would be for my teammates at Texas, or what Baylor would be, or A&M would be. And so I was a terror as a scout team player. And although they didn't like that from me very much, it was a way that I was helping my team get better. But I just busted my tail every day. The coaches appreciated that, and in due time, they trusted me and they honored me by giving me an opportunity to step on the field, which is quite a dream for me. I grew up, my hopes and aspirations, although I wanted to play football at Texas, I looked up and I thought, man, at the end of my career, 4 or 5 years later, if I got the chance to cover a kick or take a snap or two, then I would have considered it a success. Well, my first year in 2000, I redshirted, and then come around the following year, the fall of 2001, the very first game of the season, Texas was playing New Mexico State, which is a nice way to start the season for the University of Texas typically. And I don't recall the score, but Texas was whipping New Mexico State, 40 or 50 points up. And there were less than 2 minutes left in the game, and Coach Hardy McCrary, who is one of my favorite coaches of all time, Coach McCrary turns around and he grabs me by the shoulder pads and sends me out on the field to cover a kick. That's a big deal. For technically my freshman year, because I've redshirted before, and my first snap of my career was covering a kick against New Mexico State. And praise be to God, I made the tackle on that coverage. My first play. I flew down the field, I just drove through the guy trying to block me, and I made the tackle. And on that play was a teammate, a guy named Derek Johnson, who just retired from the NFL, is going to undoubtedly be an NFL Hall of Famer. We were playing in our first game together. And of course, I went on to be a special teams guy at the University of Texas. He went on to be a great NFL player. But that was my first play. And then the next week, we were whooping somebody again. Coach McCrary threw me in there again, and I made another tackle. And then another tackle, and then another tackle. And they just started stacking on top of one another, and I gained the trust of the coaching staff. Coach McCrary added me to that coverage unit for the rest of the season. And as each season went on after that, they just gave me more and more opportunities to play. So I was able to play, I played tight end offensively my first few years on campus. Then I transitioned to linebacker, back to tight end, back to linebacker. I often say that I wasn't great at either of those positions, but I was serviceable. I could help the team if we needed depth. And so I moved back and forth between those positions. I played every special teams unit: kickoff, kick coverage, kick return, punt return, field goal block. I played them all. And so throughout my 4-year playing career, I was able to play offense, defense, and every special teams unit on game day. And that was really special for me. So by the end of my career, I was very fortunate to eventually be a significant contributor on every special teams unit, but also be able to jump in there and help out offensive or defensively if we needed it.
Yeah, this is awesome because I think that a lot of times, well, first of all, you talked about it being a dreamlike experience, and I know as somebody who personally grew up playing Texas high school football, what you just described is definitely a dream for a lot of young men and football players, right? Wanting to step on the field for a Texas or a University of Colorado or Texas A&M, just to have the opportunity to play. And I think the thing that I really love about your story is it started with one kickoff, and you went down and you made the tackle. Okay, well, that's just one rep, but now you earn a rep the following week.
Right.
And really, you are a sum of your experiences. So had you not been ready for that opportunity, or you had gone down there and gotten put on your back, maybe you wouldn't have gotten the opportunity the following week. So I think it's a great lesson just in perseverance and preparing for your opportunity and taking advantage of your opportunity. And talk a little bit about Texas during this time, because University of Texas was under the leadership of Coach Mack Brown, and they went from being what I would kind of term a above average team, or maybe a good team, but hadn't really quite ascended to what you would call a great team. And during your time there was really when that ascent was taking place. So I want to just hear from your perspective as a player, like, what was the culture like during that time from 2000, when you guys were kind of like a Holiday Bowl type team, or a very frequent attendee of the Holiday Bowl, to really making the leap to being a Rose Bowl contender?
Right, great question. I think, of course, Coach Brown deserves all the credit in the world. And I could talk all day about Coach Brown. And I'll refer to him as Coach Brown instead of Mack Brown, because I respect and admire him that much. Coach Brown established a culture within that program. And I was thinking about this this week. He established a culture within that program where, although we were absolutely the most talented team that we were going to face anywhere in the country, anybody we played, we were going to be as talented or more talented. Although we had all of the talent, I'm confident that Coach Brown established a belief within the program that we knew, no matter who we were going to play, that we were going to win. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, we were going to win the game. And so we approached every week like that. And that's not to be arrogant or not to be disrespectful of who you're facing, but we had such confidence in our system, in our program, in our players, in our preparation, in our coaching, that we were going to come out on top no matter who we played. And this is fascinating to think about, because I can recall a specific moment. Of course, we didn't win every game, right? I can recall a specific moment where I was a freshman. We were losing to the University of Oklahoma significantly. They were whooping us on the scoreboard. And I was so brainwashed in believing that we're going to win every game that it wasn't until that clock hit 0 until I realized that we're not going to win. I still believed that we were going to win with 2 minutes left in the game, down by multiple scores. I just knew we were going to figure it out and make it happen. And so I believe Coach Brown deserves so much credit in establishing that belief, that culture within the organization. We just knew we were going to be the best, we were going to come out on top. And I think that obviously benefited us in 100 different ways when it came down to critical moments in games where we were behind. We never doubted that we were going to figure this thing out. We were going to win. There are multiple examples of Arkansas, Texas versus Arkansas in 2004, Texas versus Texas Tech in 2003, Texas versus Michigan in 2005. We're just going to get this thing done. I don't know who's going to be the person who breaks through and gets the play, but we're going to win. And so when you're on the sidelines with a team and there's a unified belief on that sideline that scoreboard doesn't matter. We're just going to keep playing, and we're going to come out on top here. There's a belief there that's going to drive you in a way that's very different than being on the sideline that's waiting for the other shoe to drop. We may be ahead, but we may not be able to hang on here. And I've experienced that in other circumstances as well. But I think a lot of that belief, that confidence that we're going to win is absolutely owed to the culture that Coach Brown had established within that program. The other thing that really stands out to me during that time was what I would describe as a family environment within the program at the University of Texas. The camaraderie, the fellowship, the familial experience at the University of Texas is unlike anything I've experienced at my other opportunities within programs. It was very special. There's a brotherhood there. There's a pride there that, man, if you're playing at the University of Texas, now I'm so far removed from Texas football today, so I don't know what it feels like to be in that locker room today. But when I was there, it was the greatest honor and privilege on earth to get to play for that football team. To be able to put that helmet, I still remember the first time I walked to my locker. I had a locker, that's a big deal. And there was a helmet hanging in that locker, a white, beautiful, pristine helmet with that burnt orange Longhorn decal on the side. I mean, tears came to my eyes that I got the privilege of wearing that helmet. And so that level of pride and drive that you want to make that institution proud, you want to make our program proud, it was very, very special. And so all those things, I could talk all day about Coach Brown, the culture he established. I love him. I love the way he led that organization. I think he would be great if he were still in that role at Texas. I wish he had never been unceremoniously departed from the university. But anyway, I think the world of Coach Brown, and it's no surprise to me that he's doing what he's doing at North Carolina right now.
Yeah, he's got that program turned around and really looking like they're going to be a formidable team and program for the years to come in the ACC. I want to know, you talked about the belief and you talked about the family atmosphere. I want to know, was it the fact that he was talking about this? Was he communicating it on a daily basis? Or how was he building this belief in the team? And how did that family atmosphere really come to exist? Was it something you guys talked about, or was it little things along the way that slowly built?
I think both. Coach Brown was very intentional about his personal relationships with his student athletes and his personal relationships with their families. When he says family, it's not just a tagline for him. He sincerely cares for the people within his organization. I think that's great leadership. And that's impacted me. I've wanted to replicate that throughout my life, as being the type of leader where those that I'm shepherding truly know that I care for them. And that was sincere with Coach Brown. And so the familial atmosphere, the family culture that was really palpable within the program started with Coach Brown, and the way his wife, Miss Sally, was a mother to the men in the program. And the coaches were the same way. So they replicate what they see in their boss, and they did the same thing with their student athletes. And there was just a brotherhood that was very, very special there. Now think about, this is kind of a tangent a little bit, but the privilege of being in a locker room, and how being a young man from like I said, a small, predominantly agrarian culture, mostly white community, to go get to be in a locker room filled with young men from all over the country, primarily Texas, but many African-American young men, many Hispanic young men, and the way that being in that locker room breaks down so many of those dividing walls that our culture says we're supposed to have. You put a bunch of men in a locker room together and give them a common vision and a common goal, all those dividing walls have been broken down. And I really credit a lot of my position personally on how I relate to my African-American friends, my Hispanic friends, my Asian-American friends. I credit my relation to them to my experience as a football player at Texas. And so what a thrill, what a privilege to get to be in a locker room and get to love people for who they are. And so I think that plays into really the familial vibe that I was talking about. But as it relates to the belief, that was certainly communicated. And I think back like to our strength coach, Jeff Mad Dog Madden.
Mad Dog, yes.
Mad Dog is what you'd call our strength coach, which is a terrifying name for a man, and he was a terrifying individual. But he convinced us. They convinced us that it didn't matter. We could play the Denver Broncos or the Dallas Cowboys, and we were going to come out on top. And we believed it. And so, verbally, yes, it was communicated, but we were convinced because of our ethic and our commitment to discipline and our ability that we were going to come out on top.
And your last year was a really great year for the University of Texas football team. You guys made it all the way to the Rose Bowl. And I want to know, first of all, what changed that year? You guys had kind of come up against some of the other top teams in your league and in the country and kind of fallen short up until that point. But that year, a lot of things changed. What changed, in your opinion, whether it was within the team or certain players or messages with the coaching staff getting through? Anything stand out to you during that time that really kind of changed in the program?
Yeah, great question. I think the thing that stands out to me most is a guy by the name of Vince Young. So,
heard of him?
Yeah, Vince became the primary starter in 2004. And in 2003, he and Chance Mock were battling back and forth for the starting role. Chance started several games and Vince started several games. And Vince emerged really as the guy moving forward in 2004. And as we can look back now, historically, see that he had a 2-year run that is really maybe unmatched by any other quarterback in college football history. He was just spectacularly gifted and dynamic, and he could throw, he could run, he was charismatic, his energy infiltrated the locker room, and it really kind of changed the feel of the team, if you will, where we were historically a little bit more traditional and rigid and straightforward. Vince brought some fun and some life and some vibrancy into that locker room and onto the playing field that really made the difference. I'm not saying that Vince Young is the reason that we went 11-1 and won the Rose Bowl by himself, but that was a catalyst to where the program was going. And he was, obviously, I would say he's probably the best football player I've ever been on the field with. But it was a culmination, of course, of Vince, that was Coach Brown's 5th or 6th year at Texas, and he had really established a great roster, great culture, great belief, and manifested itself in a really great year where we won the Rose Bowl against Michigan. So that was special.
Yeah, and it takes time. I think a lot of people, especially nowadays, it's like, if you're not getting it done in 2-3 years, what are we doing here? And I think one of the things when you kind of look back over time, I mean, John Wooden famously didn't win his first national championship till his 16th season as a head coach. And there's plenty of other examples in history of getting rid of coaches too soon, or maybe not getting rid of them too soon and having them experience that success. And I think that's really a great example, right? Like, even though the team had reached really good records and heights, it takes time to build that camaraderie, that family atmosphere, and then also to get the right type of players in there that really can take you to that next level. And I know after your playing career, you actually transitioned directly onto the coaching staff, if I'm not correct. Talk about that transition and what your role was.
Sure. Whenever I was wrapping up my career and started dreaming about what I wanted to do as a grown-up, what I wanted to do as a vocation, I started thinking about how much fun college football was. I mean, it was awesome. And I told Coach Brown at the end of my playing career, I said, Coach, it's just been such an honor for me to play. I would do it all over again. A lot of athletes, when they reach the end of their playing career, they're so burnt out and they're ready to move on to something else. And of course, I felt like I gave my playing career all that I had to give. But as soon as it was over, I started realizing, man, college football is a lot of fun. I'd like to keep doing this in some capacity. How can I keep doing this? And I also recognized the influence that Coach Brown specifically had in my life. Men like Hardy McCrary and Bruce Chambers and Mad Dog Madden, some of these coaches that had really influenced me and shaped me. And I recognized what a privilege that they had to be able to pour into young people. And so I had a similar desire in me that whatever I was going to do professionally, I wanted to be able to shape young men, pour into young men, invest into their development, help them to eventually become great fathers, great husbands, great men in their businesses. And so I felt like a good way to do that would be to try to get into college coaching, get into college football, because I enjoyed the sport, I enjoyed the potential access to pour into young people. And so then I stepped into volunteering, basically, is what I did. I finished up my undergraduate degree at Texas. I started graduate school right there at UT. But I went to Cleve Bryant at the time, and Coach Brown. Cleve Bryant was the director of football operations, Coach Brown being the head coach, and I just asked for their permission. I said, can I just volunteer? Can I just shadow football operations and serve and volunteer and hand out Chick-fil-A sandwiches and do bed checks and run things across campus? Whatever you need from me, I'm in. And they were gracious enough to let me do that. And so I spent just over a year and a half while I was in graduate school volunteering for the Texas football program, working in operations. So whatever they needed me to do, I was ready to do it. If I needed to run errands, if I needed to go drop Coach Brown's car off at some place, and if I needed to go get somebody's dry cleaning or go get lunch for somebody, I was in. That's not glamorous work, but I was happy to do it, happy to serve, trying to get my foot in the door, trying to learn the game, learn the profession a little bit. And I think that really helped set me up for my career.
Was there anything that you noticed going on to the coaching staff that maybe you had a greater appreciation for after seeing it from the other side that you didn't quite recognize as a player?
That's a good question. I think about there was this renovation that was taking place in Coach Brown's office. And while the gentlemen were working in his office and Coach Brown was in meetings or out of practice, I was assigned to hang out in Coach's office and just make sure these gentlemen were doing their job and not jacking around. But one of the cool perks of that role is that I got to hang there in Coach Brown's office, even at times when he was in there. And so I got to watch him work. He's not interacting with me necessarily, but I'm there. I'm trying to do productive things while he is working at his desk. And I still recall Coach Brown every day would take the time to probably write somewhere between 10 and 20 handwritten notes. And so as a recruit, or as a recruit's family, you get these handwritten notes that come in the mail, you get these kind of personal touches, and you don't really know what's behind them. But I got to see firsthand that Coach Brown is absolutely sincere in the way that he desires to make those personal touches, those personal connections. And a guy that's as busy as he is would take the time to handwrite 10, 15, 20 notes every day was really meaningful to me. I got to see behind the scenes that the man that he was, that he presented in front of the program, was who he was behind closed doors. He was authentic. He's the real deal.
Yeah, and the authenticity is so important when we're talking about strong leadership, and that's really great to see, and that you had that experience. I think that if we could all kind of get behind the scenes of some of the top performers, I think we all see, it can be an entertainer, it can be an athlete, but seeing them in their day-to-day, they're working, they're preparing for the performances that we see. We only see a fraction of what we see on television or what we see of some of these high performers, but to see them actually in the other 23 and a half hours, to know that Coach Brown is exactly the same. That's great to see and great to hear. This kind of led you to the next chapter in your career, which you started working at SMU, which is where you and I first met. And I know you were working as the assistant to the director of football operations, if I have it correctly. But talk a little bit about your experience kind of transitioning from Texas to SMU in a new role, and quite honestly, a different type of program.
That's exactly right. When I showed up at SMU, and granted, I want to clarify, I love SMU. I spent 12 years of my life there. I have that institution will have such a dear place in my heart, and has provided for me and my family in profound ways. But when I showed up there on my first day at SMU, I knew that this was a little bit different. When you're at Texas, you're at a place like Texas or a USC or maybe a Florida, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, Michigan, these kind of places, there is a tier of experience and resource and support and energy that if you don't know any better, you may not realize that it's not like that everywhere. So my experience at Texas, all I knew was Texas. I went to SMU, and it was very different. Very different. Not awful, but it was just different. The personnel athletically was very different. The resources, the support were very, very different. And I remember one of my career mentors had taught me that if you work full-time at a place like Texas, where resources are unlimited and budget is not even in your vocabulary, it may not prepare you for the real world. But if you work at a place like SMU or North Texas, or name your program that's not in the Power 5 conferences, you're going to learn and stretch yourself and grow in ways that you would have never had to at a place like UT. So you've got less resources, less support, but you've still got expectations to win, and you've got to figure out how to do that. And so that was a good growth opportunity for me and all of us on that staff to learn how to produce, even though you may not have the same resources and support. So I stepped into a role there. Actually, I began as the director of on-campus recruiting. My first role at SMU was to coordinate recruiting experiences, specifically when we have on-campus recruiting visits, official visits, unofficial visits, summer camps, things like that. But I was also helping serve with the director of football operations, so team travel, summer camps, housing on campus, scholarships, those kinds of things. And being a walk-on, it was kind of unusual because I was not recruited at all. And they hired me to be the recruiting guy on a campus, and I'd never been recruited.
What did you say in your interview? What?
I guess I just sold them on my character and my personality, which blew them away apparently.
You were flashing Rose Bowl rings.
Yeah. I still recall early on, I was hired by Phil Bennett in 2007 to coordinate and help with the recruiting efforts. And I literally had to start at square one. I had no idea what an official visit was, what an unofficial visit was. I had no concept of NCAA rules, NCAA guidelines. And I had to teach myself so much of that. I had to lean on mentors and fellow coaches to help teach me, train me, educate me. What's proper, what's appropriate, what do these things mean? And so I started with really very little to no understanding of the recruiting world. And fortunately, over 12 years, I didn't do that same role my whole career at SMU, but over those 12 years, I learned a lot. I would consider myself to be somewhat of an expert on recruiting and recruiting rules and legislation, those types of things. But when I showed up on my first day, I didn't have a clue. And that was a great learning experience for me. And I'm so grateful that Coach Bennett gave me that opportunity.
Yeah, and that's where you and I met, and I know you and I have had lots of conversations about recruiting and in particular player evaluation. One of the things you and I are both very passionate about is intangibles and measuring those intangibles. And I'm just curious if there's one or two intangibles in your experience in recruiting that you've seen really, dictate high performers, or maybe going the other way, dictate whether or not a person is not going to be successful as a college football player. So I'm just curious if there's any intangibles that stand out to you.
Yeah, I could talk about this a lot. I don't know if this is an intangible, but we would often ask, and I think this is a great question to ask a guy who's considering playing football, or if we're going to ask a high school football coach, should we recruit this kid? One of the first questions that you might ask, does he love the game? Does he love football? Does he love the sport that he's trying to play in college? If a guy is really good, but doesn't necessarily love the game, then you may not want that guy on your roster unless he's a future Heisman Trophy winner. You might figure out a way to put up with that. But generally speaking, there's very few of those guys. We want guys who love the game, a passion for it, can't live without it. If I took football away from you, then how would that leave you? All right. Of course, we've got a career that's going to end at some point. But as a 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, is this a game that he's willing to run through walls for, to commit himself, just for the opportunity to play? Does he love the game? I think that's very, very important. Another question we would ask, I think it's very important, is he a leader? Is this guy a leader? And of course, we can get into what leadership looks like or what I'm looking for in a leader. But if a guy is a team captain of his high school football team, that's a good thing. But if he's a great player in his high school football and he's not a team captain, I'd be wondering why. What is he missing? Why has the coach not appointed him to be a team captain? Or why have his teammates not nominated him to be a captain? So I want a guy who's a leader, who loves the game. And another one I would say is he tough? For a football player, that joker's got to be tough. Does he play through injury? Is he willing to put in the extra work that's expected of them? And if there's any, and this is funny, this is just kind of getting into parenthood, but I told my wife when my sons were born, I'd have 2 sons, is when they eventually play sports someday, almost the worst insult you could give to an athlete is to say that he's soft. And so I never want my sons to be thought of as soft. So that's kind of part of that component. I want a guy who's tough, who loves the game, and is a great leader. So if I've got a prospect with some of those attributes, I think we've got a chance.
No question. I also could talk about this all day. I think that you said, well, I'm not sure if this is an intangible when talking about the love of the game. I think without question, it's definitely an intangible. And the first person that comes to mind is Tom Brady, and we're all very familiar with his accolades and his accomplishments in his career. But if you go back over the last 20 years, the one thing they always say about him is that he loves it. He loves practice.
Right.
Like, if they took practice away from him on a snowy Tuesday, it would be the end of the world. And I think this is a trait that is often overlooked. And, we get enamored with measurables and what we see on film, which is great, and you need that to some extent. But when the going gets tough, when you face adversity, it's that love of the game. It's that love for getting back up and getting back after it the next morning that is really going to continue to drive you to that greatness.
Absolutely.
So I know you and I have both seen that in our career, and I 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, great.
So in this role, you obviously were dealing with operations, you're dealing with recruiting, all different facets of the organization. And you and I were there at a very unique time when we were kind of coming out of this, for lack of a better term, let's just say lull in the program's history that hadn't really seen any type of winning or sustained winning or any type of postseason play. Yeah. And we were there in 2009 for the first Hawaii Bowl championship for the team, their first bowl game in 30 years. And you were there for a long period of time and got to see really the sustained success of that program. So I just want to hear from you, from being on the ground level, on that coaching staff for over a decade. What did you see in the changes in that culture? What do you see that really led to that sustained success over that long period of time for SMU?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The experience that I got to be a part of was really special. When you think about the history of SMU football, and then of course, Coach Bennett hired me, and then he was followed by June Jones, who was followed by Chad Morris, who was followed by the current head coach, Sonny Dykes. And each of those coaches would say that they are in a position today because of the work done by the previous regime, which is totally respectable, and that's totally true. There's a temptation to take all the credit for yourself, as though Sonny Dykes has made SMU what it is today, 2 consecutive terrific seasons, all by himself. But that's not true. He knows that's not true. Chad Morris helped set him up for that, and June Jones set Chad Morris up for that, and Phil Bennett set June Jones up for that. And so each of them worked together to help build this program to where it's become today. I think one of the things that's been a real, to me, working in operations and recruiting is just the emphasis on recruiting that really made a big difference in a lot of those things. And I think Coach Jones deserves a lot of credit, although he got some grief for maybe having less of a drive towards recruiting efforts. If you look up and see the number of players that he put into the NFL that were recruited to SMU, you would recognize that he had an ability to bring in good talent. Went to 4 straight bowl games with Coach Jones as the head coach. That's never been done before, and it's never been done since at SMU. That's a big deal. And then Coach Morris was a really passionate recruiter and really got after it in the state of Texas, did a great job bringing a lot of prospects there. And then Coach Dykes has really carried some of those attributes from Coach Morris and recruiting Texas really hard, but he's also been creative with how he's brought in a lot of prospects as transfer students. And so I think recruiting has kind of been a big part, obviously a huge part of the sustained success of the last few years.
Yeah. And what is I know we're sitting here and we're talking about the talent level, which is obviously, kind of the first level of improving your status in college football. But maybe just talk briefly on the difference in maybe the feeling around the program and specifically like the culture. So obviously you're bringing in better quality players, but what have you noticed from maybe 2007, 2008 time period to now, and just maybe a general feeling around the program or a general culture piece that you are noticing around the program right now?
Sure. There's a totally different worldview and perspective of an SMU football player today than it was in 2007. There was, as I shared with you, when I transitioned from Texas, which had just won a national championship, to SMU, which was quite frankly one of the lower, maybe the bottom 10 of college football, there can be a bit of a depressive feel around the program. There's just a lackluster hunger and drive and desire at times. Well, that's not the case anymore. Those young men at SMU, they believe they're going to win, and there's a confidence that they walk in. They don't care if they're playing TCU. They're going to go beat those suckers. And so much of that is just based on the culture that you've talked about. And I think a lot of the where culture is today at SMU, Coach Dykes has done a really terrific job. I love the way that he approaches the program, the way he leads within the program. Coach Morris, that man right there was maybe the most detail-oriented head football coach I've ever been around. And every aspect of the organization he had a plan for, a structure for, a vision for. And that was impressive to me. He had a standard and an expectation for every part of the program that everyone was expected to live up to. And that really helped turn the tide, in my opinion, culturally within the program. Though Coach Jones and his staff did a great job getting us to a place where, like I said, 4 straight bowl games, really good recruiting in some ways, Coach Morris really helped bring the culture piece that was really helped us take that next step.
Yeah. It's interesting just listening to you kind of talk about it, and that's great perspective, right? Because I do remember growing up here in Dallas, Texas, and quite frankly, I didn't even know SMU was a Division I football team, because in the 90s, they were really a non-factor. They were a non-issue. They really hadn't established any type of credibility as a program. And I'll never forget in 2009, the first time that SMU had won a road game in I think almost 3 years. We were playing at UAB. We had a really tough opening season game against a Division I AA opponent and barely pulled out a win. And we went to Birmingham, Alabama, and was able to have a goal line stand on a 2-point play at the very end of the game and win. And the thing I remember most about that game was being in the locker room after the game. And I'm like, I can remember still the emotion that was running through that locker room. I can remember players in tears, right, because it was like, and I remember Coach Jones had gotten up, and obviously, we had a dear friend on that coaching staff that had passed away. And I'll never forget Coach Jones fighting back tears, really saying, like, you guys are not losers anymore.
Right.
And I remember that was just like an incredibly powerful moment, probably one of the most powerful moments in my coaching career, because that was the feeling in the program at the time. And not just because we won that game and because Coach Jones said that did it all flip in that moment. Mm-hmm. But I think that was one small win, but also a really big win along the way to kind of establishing what you see now.
Yeah, Coach Jones used to say, and correct me if I mess up this language, but he would say, we don't need to worry about winning necessarily. Let's just take care of all the small things, all the details, and the wins are going to come.
Yeah.
You just keep doing what you're supposed to do, and the wins will come. And he was right. They did. You just take care of your day-to-day small responsibilities, do the things that we ask you to do, and all these things are going to pile up together and prepare you to be in a position to eventually win. And he was right.
Yes. He used to say, we will win here.
Yeah.
We will win here. You do what we ask you to do, and we will win.
Right. You
don't do what we ask you to do, well, we can find you a place at SFA or Texas State.
I don't know about that.
So we can maybe shelve the rest of our culture and recruiting conversation for a later date and time, because we could talk all day about this. But I want to talk about, you spent 12 years at SMU. Obviously had a huge role in that program and got to see a lot of great leaders as coaches come through there, and a lot of great young men come through there as well. And you made a decision a couple of years ago to leave coaching, specifically leave SMU. And so I want to give you the opportunity to share with us kind of like what you're doing and what prompted you making that decision. That must have been a tough decision for you.
It was a very tough decision. I love college football. Just like I shared before, I love college football, and I loved SMU, still do. I could be happily employed on that coaching staff today if I so chose. And I got to a point in fatherhood where it was time to start making some serious decisions about what was best for my family. I recall in the fall of 2018, SMU was playing at Michigan at the Big House. That's a bucket list experience, living the college football dream. While standing on the sidelines at the University of Michigan while SMU's playing, we played a really good game that day, my mother-in-law sent me a text, a video of my son Luke throwing his first ever touchdown pass while I was at the Michigan game. And so while I'm living the college football dream, I'm missing my son achieve milestone moments in his life. And I stood on that sideline that day and I cried during the game. Tears were in my eyes because I knew something wasn't right about that picture. I'm up there checking the box, living the dream. So many people would love to be in my shoes, and yet I was missing my boy, missing my family. And so I knew something needed to change at that moment. While my children were small, I've got 4, 10, 8, 6, and 4 years old. While they were smaller, it didn't feel like such a loss to not necessarily be there for everything all the time, because college football is a very demanding profession. But as they've gotten bigger, and Luke's now 10, and Eli's 8, Emma's 6, Lily's 4, as they've gotten bigger, they start participating in things that you want to see and you want to be at. And so that day at Michigan, I decided something needed to change. And it wasn't that I lost my love for SMU or lost my love for college football. I needed to look into doing something else. And so I was curious to find any career that I could be a better dad, be a better husband. And providentially, the church that I'm a part of, I serve on the leadership team of this church. I serve as an elder at Eastside Community Church, which is a voluntary position. And that fall, right after that Michigan game, the lead pastor, invited me to consider to take a position full-time at the church. And it just lined up. The same time I was considering doing something else, Pastor Adam invited me to consider joining him on staff, and it seemed like that was going to be a great fit. And so my passion, just like go back to our first conversation, why I wanted to get into college football, to be able to pour into people and to shape people, mold them, impact their lives. I was able to do that for 12 years at SMU, and then to have the opportunity to step away from football, which is a game that I love, a job that I love, to be able to do the same type of work, honestly, do the same type of work and get paid to do it full time within the context of a Christian church, a ministry, seemed like a great move for me.
Yeah, no question. In a perfect alignment with your strengths and your personality and obviously your experience. It's funny listening to you talk about it because I remember you texted me that day when you were at Michigan. I remember the text came through, it was you on the field, and it was a text of excitement. It was a text that, hey, I'm at the Big House, SMU versus Michigan.
Right.
And so to hear kind of the way the rest of that day transpired, very powerful, and I have a lot of respect for you. Like, that's not an easy decision to make, especially when you and I both have these previous careers that we poured so much into college football. But at a certain point, you have to recognize, am I being fulfilled? Am I happy? And so it really does seem like you've kind of been able to seamlessly transition into this new role that really does align with a lot of things that you're very passionate about. Talk briefly about what have you taken from your coaching career that you now apply to your work working with Eastside Community Church?
Thanks for asking. A couple things come to mind. I think about as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I admired most in the leaders that have poured into my life is their sincerity and their obvious love for me. If you can convince me that you love me and you care for me, I'll run through that wall for you. And so in my job at Eastside as a pastor, part of my job, and I'm not being insincere, I want you to understand and know that I love you. I care for you. I'm willing to lay it on the line for you. I want to invest into your life. And so that's no different than the way I would work as a college football coach, as a staff member at SMU, pouring into those men, letting them know how much I care for them and love them. I do the same thing with my work at Eastside every day. Additionally, when you have a church that is growing, we've got hundreds of people that are a part of our church, and there's just a few of us on staff. I don't have the ability to get one-on-one with hundreds of men. I just don't have the bandwidth or the time or the energy to do that. And so one of the things that I do as a part of my work is I invest in the men at our church, one-on-one, the men that I have identified as leaders within our church. And so I spend most of my time chasing down, investing into, pouring into the men of our church in hopes that they too are investing in, pouring in to the men that they influence. And so it's got a multiplication effect. Instead of me trying to meet with 500 men one-on-one, I meet with 50 men throughout a month that are hopefully investing in 5 to 10 men themselves, and just multiplying, growing, challenging one another. Ultimately, the hope is that I would be pressing them to mature in their relationship with the Lord, not just to be good people, but my hope is to stir them up towards maturity in Christ and a greater love for God. And so that's what I spend my days doing, which is not very different than what I was doing at SMU. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's really cool. And obviously a lot of people are coming to you now for advice, and when they have tough or difficult decisions, you're somebody that they turn to. Who do you turn to when you have difficult decisions to make?
Thanks for asking. The first person I would turn to is my Lord. From a spiritual perspective, I've got to turn to the Lord in prayer. I've got to turn to the scriptures and hear what the Lord has to say through that. That's where I find my greatest counsel and comfort. But I also have a team of men that I've surrounded in my life. I refer to them as my iron sharpens iron men. That's from a Bible verse. We sharpen one another as we invade one another's lives. And so I've got a group of men, several of which are former SMU football players, that we walk together and we challenge one another. And when I have a difficult decision to make, these are the men I'm turning to. And when they have difficult things in their life, they're calling upon me, and we consult one another and care for one another. But they also call me out when I'm being a fool, when I'm not being the man that I'm expected to be or that I should be as a man of God. These are the men in my life that I have asked and invited to confront me in my foolishness, confront me in my sin, because I recognize I need that in my life. And if anyone believes that they don't need that level of accountability in their life, I think they're foolish. And so I need that in my life. So I've got a group of men, iron sharpens iron, and these guys, they keep me on the straight path.
That's great. That's great. I totally agree. I think having a strong inner circle, people that can not only help you make decisions like that, but also hold you accountable when you are acting a fool, as you put it. Yes. Very important.
Which I do often.
We are all susceptible at times, right, to our own foolishness. And you also are Coach Stigall currently, because you have several sports teams that you coach.
Right.
How have you utilized your coaching career previously into your new role as, pardon me if I mess this up, 5th grade head basketball coach?
It's a big deal. 5th grade basketball coach for these young men that are Luke's age. They play basketball with the SVAA league here in Dallas. and also coach a third grade flag football team for Eli and his team. The things I've learned from coaching, I don't know how well they parlay from the college level to 5th and 3rd grade. But what I do try to invoke is that I coach these young boys as though they're my own sons. And so I treat them and expect them to behave in ways that I would ask my own sons to behave. Now, I recognize there's a lot of different parenting techniques out there, but very few kids that I come across have the level of respect and discipline and integrity that the Stigall kids have. And so I think that one of the values that I can bring to the basketball court or the football field is teaching you how to act the right way. Showing respect to your teammates, respecting the officials, respecting the game, working hard, integrity, doing the right things. These are the things that I care about as a youth sports coach. X's and O's and technique and even wins and losses are far down the line for me as a youth sports coach. I want these boys to know how to act, how to compete, the benefits of winning, the difficulties of losing, how to treat one another. These are the things that matter to me. And those are the things that as a dad, I'm pouring into my sons and daughters all the time. And now you invite me to be your youth sports coach. Guess what? I'm going to teach your kid to say yes sir, no sir. I'm going to teach him what it means to show up on time and to touch the line when he's supposed to touch the line. So these are small things, but I hope that they help these young men grow up to be quality adults someday.
Well, I know personally I love hearing your stories from the trials and tribulations of Coach Stigall. And, kind of like you said, a couple of years ago, just realizing that that wasn't anything that you wanted to miss. You wanted to be a big part of it. And I just absolutely love hearing that you are now a huge part of it and getting to not only witness, but also have a huge role in molding the lives of not only your kids, but also the teammates of your children as well.
That's right. Last week I was coaching basketball for Luke. These are 5th grade boys. And during practice, a 3rd grader who was on my football team came by the court and he says, hey coach. And it just gave me such joy that this little boy who's Eli's son, my son's age, is referring to me as coach. He thinks of me as his coach. Before I was just a dad who's at the games.
Right.
He was so proud to see his coach, and that gave me a lot of gratification. I'm proud to serve in that role for those boys, and hope I can do my very best to help them grow up a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to finish with this. You're somebody I come to for a lot of guidance for a myriad of things. One in particular is barbecue. Sure. And barbecue etiquette. And so just want to get your advice to the audience just on barbecue etiquette, and maybe if there is a establishment in particular you'd like to recommend for barbecue. We're both Texas boys. Yes. And so something both that's very near and dear to our hearts. So just want to give you the floor to wrap up with some barbecue advice for the audience out there.
Well, to my shame, I could talk about this all day. I'm way too excited to talk about Texas barbecue. No offense to barbecues and other parts of the United States.
Oh, no, of course not.
But I have a particular enthusiasm for Texas barbecue, specifically brisket. And we are fortunate to be living in Dallas, Texas in the time that we are, Evan, because 20 years ago, the Texas barbecue scene was pretty weak in the city of Dallas. But just in the last decade, there's been a great resurgence in high-end, elite-level barbecue. There's a place up in Addison that's called Cadillac that I believe is maybe one of the finest plates of barbecue that you'll get anywhere in the world. All right, it is absolutely elite. There's a place over near the Design District that's called the Slow Bone that is awesome. Terry Black's Barbecue down in Deep Ellum, Pecan Lodge in Deep Ellum. These are the best place, in my opinion, the best places to visit in Dallas, Texas. Of course, you want to spend a lot of time in the hill country around Austin. There's some great barbecue down that way. If you go to a Texas barbecue place, just be cool. Don't act like you know everything about the menu. I would maybe even ask the guy behind the counter, what do you recommend? Just give me what you think is best today. But I typically like to get about a half a pound of brisket, moist. They'll ask you, do you want it moist, or moist is a nice word for fatty. Do you want it fatty or do you want it lean? Well, I want it fatty. That's got a lot of flavor and juice in it. But if you're an adult and you're ordering through the barbecue line, you probably want to get about a half pound total meat. Some people, their eyes get really big and they start trying to pile on, give me some ribs, give me some sausage, give me some brisket. Well, sure, you can do that, but you probably need somewhere between a half pound and 3/4 of a pound if you're very hungry. So you get about a half pound of moist brisket, get a side or two, get some sweet tea. Sweet tea is an essential beverage for me with Texas barbecue. If you go to a barbecue place and they don't serve sweet tea, I would be concerned. But that doesn't mean they don't have great barbecue. So for me, the way to judge a quality barbecue establishment in the Lone Star State is how is the brisket. Give me some great brisket, give me some beans on the side, a little white bread, some sweet tea. I'll be a happy man.
That's awesome. Steve, thank you so much for joining us, and really look forward to future conversations. And thank you so much.
It's my honor. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. Cut.